This is the Lord's Day lesson for March the 1st, 2026 here on Following Him, the Disciple Life. It's His church. In Matthew 16, verse 16, we have Simon Peter giving his famous answer, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, just something for you to look into later. Look at Simon Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2. His sermon in Acts chapter 2 is essentially an expansion of his answer in Matthew 16:16. And we see in Acts 2 that the messiahship of Jesus is what leads to the building of his church. It's what leads people to ask, "Men and brethren, what shall we do?" But anyways, in verse 17, we have that Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." Now, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about in these verses. I do recognize I have introduced some verses about which there's definitely some discussion, shall we say, maybe just a little bit among various religious folks about what is meant by every point in here. At some point, I'm going to dig into that, and we will do our best to have a biblical view of everything that's going on in these verses. But one thing that cannot be denied is who the church belongs to that is going to be built, that Jesus is talking about. He will build his church. His ecclesia is the Greek word. Now, he's not talking about a church as sometimes the English word is used. Sometimes the English word is used to talk about a building. But whenever we see that word church in the English translations of the Bible, it's never a reference in the Bible, in the English Bible, to a literal building. Sometimes a church might be talked about in like metaphorical terms about being a type of building and that sort of thing. But whenever the church is being talked about literally, it's talking about the assembly, because that's what the word means. It means a congregation, a group of people. You would have an ecclesia at the local synagogue. You had an ecclesia. These verses take place when they're in the area there at Caesarea Philippi. Well, there were places of pagan worship there. And so you had a type of ecclesia, a type of congregation, people gathered to participate in pagan worship. Well, Jesus, he was going to build his ecclesia. It's his. It belongs to him. And so when they with their church, when they are trying to determine what it is they're going to teach and what sort of worship they're going to offer and how they're going to organize their church and all these different things, they need to be asking, what does Jesus want? Why? Because it's his church. Jesus said that those that abide in his word are his disciples indeed. And disciples are who makes up the church. The church is the disciples, is the Christians. So it's his church. We need to keep that in mind when it comes to what we do in a congregation and make sure we are honoring his ownership and not viewing it as something that we get to decide. We don't. He does. It's his. You have a great rest of the day. This is the Lord's Day. I would encourage you to worship with true disciples of the Christ, to worship with a church that is following him, that is doing things his way, not man's way. And shalom.